see the world through other people's eyes. Now, empathy is a quality of character that can change the world.
Hi, it's Edwin Rutsch from the Center for Building a Culture of Empathy, and I'm here with Jori Manske, and we're here to talk about how we can build a culture of empathy together. And thanks for joining me, Jori.
Oh, I'm delighted to be here. Actually, I've watched your work and I'm so excited about what you do, and I'm happy to contribute to it.
Oh, thank you. I've also watched your work. I started about 4 years ago, kind of exploring really in depth empathy, and when I kind of did Google searches, it was actually some of your videos that popped up. So some of the early material that I found was from you. So, yeah. So, and you are a nonviolent communication or compassionate communication trainer. And would you like to introduce yourself a little bit? I have your website and your Facebook page here that I can show as you kind of just introduce yourself.
Yeah, well, I am an NVC trainer with the Center for Nonviolent Communication. I've worked closely with the center over the years on and off, and I also am a trainer with Compassionate Leadership. It's a program that 4 trainers started in 2007, and it's one of the things I feel most passionately about is compassionate leadership in general, and we can talk a bit more about that. My personal website is Radical Compassion, and that is my website with my husband Jim, who you also interviewed, and I really enjoy working with him. It's one of the joys of my life, how we can do this work and actually model what it's like to be a couple who try and work together and live together, and more than try, we do.
You try and succeed.
And our business since 1992 has been Peaceworks. We are mediators. We started mediating back in 1992 and also doing public meeting facilitation. And we also do groups and training and work with organizations. So that's the work we do.
Yeah, and I see on your website the Radical Compassion is a photo of you and Jim together.
Yeah, that was taken actually by a National Geographic photographer, quite a famous one, on Molokai. So it's particularly, I like that picture a lot. It's particularly complimentary.
Yeah, so you've really been working at exploring empathy for quite a while then. I mean, relatively. How?
Yeah. In 1992, we decided we had a financial plan for being able to free ourselves up to do the work that we actually wanted to do, rather than just work to be financially stable and be able to provide for our children. And we succeeded in that. And then we took, a few months of just sitting back and going, okay, so we worked really hard for several years. What is it that we really want to do? And we decided we wanted to be peacemakers. We wanted to contribute to peace in the world. That's our business name, Peaceworks. And moving into the mediation and public meeting facilitation and decision making. And so it soon became apparent that empathy was a key part of that, that having a culture of empathy, having the skills of empathy and supporting empathy with people was a way to bring more peace both internally and in our relationships and even worldwide. This can make the difference because we can connect to each other as human beings, and we can also take care of our hearts, which is what really is the reactive piece that is getting in the way of peace.
Was there like a moment, like one of those aha moment where the brilliance of empathy kind of struck you, or was it just kind of a gradual development?
I think I had it focused more on compassion and liberation for many years. The word empathy really became more a focus as a way of labeling what I was moving toward when I met Marshall in 2000. So that shifted the awareness to that what I'm actually talking about is empathy. And it also started to expand my understanding of what empathy was. And it actually is different than compassion. So it's been a very wonderful learning. And I've explored it in a lot of different directions and enjoying what I've learned about it and really promoting that in our work to create. When I work with organizations, what I'm supporting and encouraging people to have is a culture of empathy right in their organizations, where people actually hear each other and our mutual support for each other. When we actually come from that place where our intention is to support empathy between us, everybody is empowered, and we have a system that works together rather than in conflict and pulling in different directions.
Yeah, so it sounds like you were interested in compassion, and then as you took some of the workshops with Marshall Rosenberg, and he talks a lot about empathy, that you kind of transitioned to kind of focusing on that word. And was there something there, some kind of a moment of insight about empathy? Like an actual anecdote or story or something that was kind of meaningful?
I'm not remembering a particular moment. When you mentioned that, I do connect to something that is related to empathy that took me on the path as opposed to actually empathy itself, because the path actually went from understanding interdependence to personal liberation to compassion to empathy.
What was that story?
I was in college walking across campus, and I don't know if I had read about the butterfly effect or had just heard about it in a class, but I can still picture myself in that moment, standing and walking across campus in front of a particular building. It's that vivid for me, where I suddenly got a visceral experience of how we are actually interrelated, that what happens in one place affects what happens in another. What happens with one person is part of the gestalt of what happens in the whole system. And so that actually led me to understanding on a broader level. And the way it relates to empathy is that empathy for me is bringing us together so that we have some sort of harmonic rhythm together. And finding those places where there is friction or lack of collaboration or coordination in the field, and then bringing together that empathy as the salve of our hearts so that we can find that resonance and rhythm again together.
Well, I've recently started really focusing on metaphor for empathy. Like, what is a metaphor for empathy? And I asked you that previously, and one of qualities or metaphors was the salve you had, right? So
yeah.
Empathy is like a salve on your heart.
Yeah, it's the salve, and then that enables us to move into action together in a coordinated way. So it lays the foundation.
Yeah. So, what were the others? You had the metaphors of two hearts beating together and walking in sync, or what?
Yeah, the one that really resonates for me and that comes up in my mind a lot as I think of empathy is the poem "The Footprints in the Sand." Are you familiar with that?
No.
That's where it's looking back on your life and seeing two footprints, two sets of footprints in the sand. That's the poem. And I often think about we're actually walking together where neither is necessarily trying to pull the other or push the other. We're actually walking together in harmony. And empathy is also in those moments when it's the hardest. One of us is willing to carry the other. Mm. And so sometimes there are only two footprints in the sand, and we think that means that we're actually alone. But we're not actually alone. It's actually that we're carrying each other if we're having a path of empathy together.
So it's like if you look back and you're seeing in the sand, since you're in Hawaii, right? You're kind of doing a lot of walking on the sand. You look back and there you see just one set of footprints. You say, "Uh-oh, I'm alone," but you're not really alone because you're kind of carrying someone else with you. So you're actually, so maybe the footprints would have to be like especially deep footprints, or.
Well, it's actually looking back and seeing two sets of footprints behind, and seeing that sort of consistency, and then all of a sudden seeing that one of the sets of footprints goes away.
Oh.
And when it's two sets of footprints, they're kind of even and they're going together, and they have their own sort of parallel there. And then in some moments the footprints go away, and maybe those footprints that are left over are actually deeper because there's more way to it.
This is a little creative license. I'm embellishing on your.
I like it. I like it. You're adding to my picture.
Building on your metaphor. So the other metaphor, it's very similar to the two hearts beating together. So they kind of get in. It's something about getting in sync with each other, and
right.
Yeah.
And in actuality, the truth is that when we are in empathy, and when we are really connected, our hearts do start to beat at a similar rate. They've done studies with this, particularly with HeartMath, did some studies. And there was a study where there were two hearts taken out of some creatures, a little horrific thought, and two hearts taken out, and they were still beating in their petri dishes. And as they brought them closer and closer together, they would start beating at the same rate. And as they moved them further apart, they would get arrhythmic. And so that is now a metaphor for me, and an image that I take with me as I consider empathy and grounding myself in the intention of empathy.
Yeah. So then what does that feel like? What is the kind of the physical sensation of empathy? Like if you're looking into your body as a felt sensation. So when your heart's beating with someone else, and
boy, it can be a variety of things. It depends on the rhythm of the beat, actually, in the body. What I connect to, as you say, that is a clarity of intention. So I have a clarity of intention and a focus. So my intention is to be in rhythm with, and my focus when I'm in empathy with another is to be on the other. So that's what I connect to as more of the response that I get. In terms, now that I say that, I can also tune into, there's also a heart opening for me. I actually feel spacious in my heart, that visceral feeling. And sometimes I connect to, when you say in my body, I'm aware of lots of different feelings. I might feel some sadness, I might feel some joy, and my heart is open, and I'm actually feeling with the other person. I know it's their feeling, but I feel the resonance of it in me.
Yeah, for me, empathy is like a cornucopia. I kind of see it as I empathize with you, or I kind of have that richness of the cornucopia that kind of opens and kind of deepens the kind of the richness. So for me, it's kind of the creative part of it. It's the sensory and the creativity that kind of comes out of that.
Uh-huh. Jim and I have met in a spiritual community called Cornucopia, so that's fun to hear. And what that stimulates in me is one of the gifts of empathy is I get to expand my perspective. I get to see the world more fully. I only have two eyes in front of my head, just like most of us. I don't really know what's behind me. I often say, with empathy, I've got your back and you've got mine, so that we see more of a full 360 around us of what's actually happening in the world. We all have limited perspective. We're all actually mostly ignorant. We really are. We have just so much that we can hold in awareness around the immense cornucopia of experience going on around us. And so every time I am with someone in empathy, it's as if my perspective has expanded. And if I'm in a group where we're in that harmonic together, where we're really holding each other and co-creating and collaborating, then it expands even further.
Yeah,
it's a great gift.
Yeah, it's that kind of that opening up that, and that's kind of the cornucopia for me, is that I kind of open, so I can feel all those different feelings. It's almost the cornucopia. I do like a freestyle dance. It's very physical, and I just enjoy the feelings. Sometimes just sitting back and watching people, you just kind of feel their emotions, their movements within. And so for me, the opposite of empathy would be like a desert, where it's just the Sahara, hot, dry, and just no kind of nothing there but the monotone of the sand and the heat. Do you have a metaphor of what the opposite of empathy would be like?
A tug of war. It's just, you asked me that in an email, and nothing came to me until just this morning. I mean, what is the opposite? I mean, because everything I would think of, I could see I could empathize with, and make space for in the world. And the tug of war kind of thing, where everybody's pulling in their own direction, and actually nothing is really happening. Nothing gets served, because it's a pulling against rather than a working with. Yeah.
So that's a bit of the conflict part of somehow the conflict. I kind of seeing the conflict as the tug of war too. When people are in some sort of conflict, that they're like each pulling in a different direction, and that somehow we need to get from that tug of war, maybe that conflict, to a culture of empathy. So a culture where our hearts are beating together.
Yeah, even the tug of war is, we could do that with fun and empathy as well. When we lose sight of each other, maybe being blindfolded and having earplugs on so we can't hear anybody else either. And actually, as you say it, what I connect to is such loneliness. Just really feeling alone and separate from everything else. So it goes back to your desert, where you're not connecting to much life there.
Yeah, maybe like one of those sensory deprivation tanks where they blind you and they no audio, no physical, nothing.
And some sort of music playing about the horrors outside. I actually like sensory deprivation in meditation, but that sense of fear, fear and distance, and being not just alone and peaceful, but really separate from everything else in a way that is very lonely, very lonely.
So how do we get from that sense of fear and loneliness in that world to a deeper empathy? You know, how do we transition? And I see empathy as not like, well, we turn it on and off, but that there's gradations, you know, between
Mm.
that. And so, what kind of your insights about how do we get there to?
Mm-hmm. It's interesting. You said that you don't see it as something we turn on and off, but actually something that continues to grow. So that's how you experience it. That once you are actually experiencing empathy, then it is always there, and it keeps growing in you.
The way I'm seeing it is a bit more like a dimmer switch. Like I have, you know, like here's a light, right?
Uh-huh.
So, you know, empathy for me is like, this would be like zero empathy if there is such, which I guess there could be. But then it's like it can kind of, there's degrees,
Uh-huh.
right? So
So yeah.
this is like super bright, maybe love, right? You can't,
Uh-huh.
all you see is the light, and then, you
Uh-huh.
know, we slowly dim it. This is a little bit of empathy, less empathy, low empathy, you know, and, you know, so that's at least that's like a metaphor for me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like that because once we actually have empathy turned on in our system, then we have access to it. And in fact, there's a part of our brain that develops right around the age of 18, 20, somewhere in there, 21, that actually opens up to experience a broader sense of empathy. And it only opens up if we have it modeled in our lives. Now, I know children can have caring for each other and want to contribute to each other and to other people, but the actual depth of the empathy, there's something in our brain that needs it modeled to make it happen. And now I forgot your question, actually.
It was kind of how do we kind of turn the dimmer switch up on
Up
empathy,
in
which
yeah.
is a little bit, you know, we had kind of like a metaphor of empathy, but it kind of it kind of begs the question of, you know, how do we define empathy? And
Mm-hmm.
I
Mm-hmm.
have like my own model that I've put together from all these different. You know, I've been looking at this so much. But I'm
Mm-hmm.
seeing, it might be interesting just if I could just share it and kind of get your feedback on
Mm-hmm.
it. Is I'm seeing like four parts to empathy. There's the self-empathy, so that's like awareness, mindfulness, sensory awareness of what's going on within myself.
Mm-hmm.
And as I'm kind of more open and more kind of relaxed with just having that awareness, then I can kind of take in others, and that's through mirrored empathy,
Mm-hmm.
which is through mirror neurons. So as I see you, I can see your head shaking, and
Mm-hmm.
I can see how your muscles are, and that gets mirrored within myself. So I
Mm-hmm.
can feel your concentration, and you know, now a little
Mm-hmm.
bit of humor kind of coming up in your smile, and that
Mm-hmm.
kind of gets reflected through mirror neurons, you know, kind of emotionally. It's called, through the scientists, they call it emotional contagion, or emotional empathy, or. And then there's a third part, which is perspective taking, which is at like about 18 months, old children start realizing that they are separate beings from others,
Mm-hmm.
and they can recognize themselves in the mirror.
Mm-hmm.
And that means that you can start taking the position of someone else as a separate being, and see
Mm-hmm.
how the world kind of works from, you know, just through imagination, how it worked, what would happen if I was in that situation. And that's called, the academics call it perspective taking or cognitive empathy, or I like to call it just imaginative empathy. So,
Mm-hmm.
and then the fourth part is empathic action. That as we kind of connect at those different levels, it's how do we work together to take action together, and you and I see that really playing out in mediation. Um, you do mediation too, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, you
Yeah.
know, when the parties dispute and they're very mad at each other, they're not seeing each other, they
Mm-hmm.
start talking, you know, they finally start empathizing. and then they have like a game plan that they do to work together, and they start negotiating how they're going to work. And if the empathy is there, that kind of happens. That action together can kind of happen, is empathic action. And if something hasn't been heard, something hasn't been, they connected, there's still some kind of a block to that empathic action. So that's like a model of empathy that I've been working on, and bringing together all these different definitions. Because it's a real mess out there, how even the academics, they all disagree, about the definition of empathy. So I'm just wondering, from your understanding, how that kind of fits.
Now that from a developmental level, in the development process, that resonates a lot with me. And also, it's very clear to me, self-empathy is extremely important, and self-care is extremely important in being able to establish empathy. Because if we can't give what we don't have. If we don't take care of ourselves and our resources are low, our needs, even at the survival level, and also at the thrival level, will start to get so loud that it becomes hard for us to shift our focus to another person and to that place of compassion and action that you spoke of. And so first and foremost, to be connected inside, because if I'm going to extend my attention to another, then there's a certain amount of choicefulness in that is really important. And so for me, in the moments when I go, empathy, I want to increase my empathy, one of the first things I do is I shift my focus to another person. And I can stimulate empathy, and I often suggest to people to stimulate in the early moments of empathy with just curiosity. Curiosity is a very open state, and it is focused outward. So that supports empathy. And then to make spaciousness. Notice any kind of constriction that I might have about how it's supposed to be, or just the sort of yang energy of trying to control anything, and just to open up my heart and to focus on another, make space, and just then also ramp up my engagement, to just really be engaged in what's going on. And then I'm in the space of letting it just happen. And then it just naturally flows into a deepening state of empathy.
Well, for me, doing kind of these interviews, I kind of look at myself doing it, and sometimes I feel like, well, I got to kind of make something happen. So I think that's a little bit like part two of your, that you want to let things unfold and not be kind of controlling. But I have like a little bit of anxiety about it. Is that we don't kind of keep the ball rolling, it'll kind of degenerate into who knows where it'll go. So I'm just,
So it's really, you notice how really important it is that we actually do something. Empathy is not the end all. That's why it's the salve for me. It's the salve, but the real healing and the real giving and the real action in the world is what the salve is setting up for. So compassionate giving and receiving. For me, the empathy is so important before we move to action, or we have that pull, that tug of war going on, and we have those blinders on that limit the efficacy of the action that we take. So in some ways, it is an end in itself. It's really such an important element of life. And in another way, it is actually a means toward efficacy out in the world and creating a world where there is compassionate action.
Well, how do you let go then? Like, what are you doing to kind of not force things to happen, but to let things kind of evolve and develop with empathy?
For me, it's a pacing. Empathy is just a pacing with. And then at some time when the footsteps in the sand are now in parallel and the hearts are beating together, then there's the opportunity to lead.
Mm.
So we're not leading from a place of dominance, but rather a place of collaboration.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, so it's really trying to find that mirroring, to keep working at that mirroring. Where's the other person? You know, kind of what am I feeling? Try to see where they are. And I'm here to, you know, to be with you, to follow you, to reflect you. I'm wanting to hear everything you have to say or who you are. And at some point, there's a clicking. But then sometimes, too, it's that sharing. There seems to be of empathy. That part right there seems to be I'm looking at trying to mirror the other person, which is kind of the second part. Or well, it's
Mm-hmm.
I mean these parts. It's not like they're one necessarily builds on the other, but
Mm-hmm.
that it's it's that I could also other things I've seen found is that if I just share from myself how I am, that kind of can open the door to the other person kind of connecting more deeply and
Mm-hmm.
empathizing with me to come to that sense of connection.
Yeah, so how much your authenticity is a gift to another to be able to experience empathy
Yeah.
inside of them, and what a great gift that is, because it feels so good. Yeah. And for me, the goal, the initial goal is to create connection
Hmm.
and connect and create that rhythm, and to have that awareness of when that rhythm together shifts. When that rhythm is together, full speed ahead. Even if we're going in different directions in that moment, we're still together. And then to have that sensitivity to know the difference between we are actually connected, and I'll talk a bit about connection in a moment because there's more to that, but that we're actually connected in the actions that we're taking. And what I wanted to say also about connection is often seen as the connection between you and me, but for me it's a deeper word. For me, it's not the interaction. The interaction is not connection. I mean, not that it's not connection, but connection is deeper than that. Interaction is just a part of that may be there, because connection is connection to life, connection to myself, connection to my feet on the ground, metaphorically, that I'm actually here now, and connection to the life energy that we share. So that may or may not include interaction between two people directly in that moment, and still I can feel connected to you. Jim's now gone off into town about, I don't know, 10 miles away. I still know that connection is there, but we're not interacting.
Yeah, so it's like some sense of connection. So for you, the goal is to connect. I mean, or the kind of what you're wanting with for you for empathy is the connecting part. It's kind of that resonance with someone and yourself too.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like feeling connected with yourself and connected with the other.
And dispelling the illusion of separateness. You know, we think we're separate sometimes, and that's an illusion.
Mm.
So it's actually coming back to a deep truth.
Yeah, it's
Our
kind of like a state of,
interconnectedness.
it's almost like a state of awareness of, and for me, one of the blocks there is fear.
Absolutely.
Is it seems that there seems to be almost like this. I don't know if it's a polarity, but that as I can, and I've had this. I've told this story quite a few times about that in dance, you know, I was telling you about this freestyle dance, that I was just noticing my own fear. You know, I just kind of sit and am mindful. I can feel the contours of the fear. I have like a fear that's a bit like a spike, you know, going through this part, and another fear that's a bit more like a numbness, like a over. And so there's just, and I was saying, you know, what is this fear? I have this anxiety in my body. I'm aware of it. I want to get as close as I can to it as possible, be as present, and I want to expand it. I want to maximize its presence, its manifestation in me, and get as close as I can to really see the qualities of it. And I found that as I started doing that, it would start kind of disappearing as I got close to it. But within 3 to 5 seconds, another one would appear. And it would have a whole different contours. It would be like the spike of fear that's going through my heart. And it would disappear, and then kind of an overall numbing fear would kind of come into place. And then there would be fears, other fears of when I started dancing with people, that they would detach from me. And this sense of fear of kind of this detachment. So it was like one fear. I was just amazed at how many fears and how many manifestations of fears there was. So
that to me is self-empathy, by the way. You're leaning into being with what's actually happening. I love it. I love what you're.
Yeah, it was one
what
of those.
You learned about
Yeah.
that. Yeah.
It was one of those peak experiences, and I've tried to kind of get back to it, but you know, sometimes it's hard to have that same, you know, connection with those peak experiences. But you know, I keep seeing that as like, how do I kind of deepen that? And I think one way is to share it with people, you know, like yourself, and have others kind of hear that. And I think that's what you know, we can have that self-empathy, but then there's the empathy of sharing the experience with someone else, and not being alone in that experience.
And giving the gift to other people of being able to learn about you and also what's true for them, because what is happening for you is not foreign to me or to anybody if we're awake. It may be somewhat unique in the way you put it together, but I love what Terence, he was a Roman slave many centuries ago, said, "Nothing human is foreign to me." Nothing human is foreign to me. So your sharing that beautiful story is such a gift to the awakening of what's possible when we move into what's actually happening, instead of what we often do is push it away. And I love that part where you talked about how the numbing would happen, because we want to go unconscious on this. The fear is so scary. You know, it's so devastating in a way. It's so deadening. And we want to move away from it. And ironically, what we do is we deaden ourselves the more we move away from what's actually happening. Yeah, I love that. Course in Miracles says, what isn't love is fear. That fear is the opposite of love. And that, to me, to really sit with our fears is one of the most powerful avenues of connecting to love and compassion and empathy.
Yeah, it was almost as if I was trying to see, is this empathizing with the fears? You know, is that, I guess within that experience, I was trying to see what the empathy part was, because it seemed that by being present with that fear, that it's very similar to empathizing with someone else. That, you know, if they're in fear, just be present, and so it's a little. It seems like it's a different way of looking. It's kind of like an embodied way of looking at it versus kind of more of a, you know, detached model of empathy.
Yeah, it's being really present with the fear, giving it space, and focusing on it without identifying with it. Yes, this is happening inside of me, but that's not who you were, who you are, and not who you were, not the part of you were necessarily identifying with. Yes, it's, I have this suitcase, but I'm not the suitcase.
Yeah.
Does that resonate for you in that experience?
There was it was not, I did not feel, it was a combination of being attached and not attached, but the presence to it was kind of, it was like, it's I don't even know if it detached, and it was that sense of presence, not attached to the sense of holding it. There was as I was being present with it, I could feel my body relax. It's like every time I kind of went through a fear, my body relaxed a little bit more and a little bit more and a little bit more. And after the dance, I was like so relaxed. I mean, it was like, it was just, it was like there was nothing I needed to do, just kind of bathe in this, in this feeling. It was just so good. And just recently, just Wednesday, a couple of days ago, I went to the dance again, and I was trying to recreate it, and it was like really hard. It was almost like I didn't want to give up my fears. It was almost, I was thinking, fears are like a source of energy. We don't want to give up our fears because there's something, pretty deep there. It's like,
fears, it seems to me, let's see if this resonates for you, that fear, the purpose of fear inside of us is for us to wake up and pay attention to safety. And so it's really an important internal communication. And so trying to give it up without addressing the clarity of whether you're safe or not is it's the opposite of what our inner wise guy is willing to do.
Yeah.
And so it sounds like in the first one, you were willing to just be with that fear, come just look at it, come into the present, notice that, nobody has any guns here, nobody's trying to hurt me, and to keep opening it up and opening it up and opening it up. No. Does that resonate for you?
Very much so. It was that opening. It's like it just kept it going present, being present with it, and then the opening up to the next fear. What was so amazing to me was it seemed that fear has like an unlimited constellations of fear. It's just like no two faces are the same, in a sense, that no two fears are the same. I mean, there's similarities, but they all have a different mix and a different constellation. And so that was like really quite interesting.
Yeah, would you like to hear some things about fear from me?
I'd love to. Yes, I thought you were supposed to be listening to you.
No. I loved what you just said, and it's just really stimulated a lot for me.
Oh, yeah.
Because we were going to meet last week, and I changed the appointment because something happened in my life that required immediate attention. Basically, someone stole, if you will, my social security number and my identifying information and started taking out loans and credit cards in my name. And one of the things, I can still feel the sadness. The thing I mourned the most was the loss of trust and being in that fear. So I have some real direct experience of just having gone through something that really was, there was something to be afraid of. And I don't know if you have ever heard this phrase, just because you're paranoid doesn't mean there's nothing to be afraid of.
Right.
Yeah. So I had a direct experience of suddenly having this sense of fear. And it's not that I never feel fear, but I don't have a lot of fear in my life right now. I feel amazingly safe. I probably live in one of the safest places I've ever lived in my entire life. And fear hasn't come up a lot. And the hardest part for me was the mourning, my lack of trust. I would get these phone calls from loan companies saying that it was approved, or even from the fraud departments. The second call was from a fraud department of a credit company about a credit card. And I'm on the phone with this person, and I realize I've got a wall up between me and that person, and it's not a state that I'm used to being in. I think maybe it comes and goes, and, you know, it's not, as I said, that I never have it, but it's like my whole guard was up. I don't even know that you're actually who you say you are. I'm calling back your number. I didn't initiate this call, and I've just been made clear that there's the possibility that this happens in the world. Not that I didn't know it, but that it's the possibility that this is happening in my world, and maybe you're part of it. I don't know, and I could just feel that closing down. And in actuality, I stopped and I looked at that, and I made a conscious choice to keep my guard up. And, you know, I go, okay, thank you, fear, for letting me know that there's something to be careful about. This time I actually see it. It's true. Often I go, oh, thank you, old friend. You want me to be safe. I'm on it. You know, that helps me to liberate fear. Often that's a little technique I use in my head when feelings come up, and I explore them to see if they are actually meaningful or just habituated. And so that was the hardest part for me. I spent a week until just about 4 days ago on yellow alert. I was spending almost pretty much a full-time job on the phone talking to people. And it wasn't until I think the third day when I got a call from a company I actually have a credit card with, so I could call the number on the back of my credit card, that I was totally willing to open up. And when I talked to the police, you know, and even when the police, you know, I called the police because I was told to do a police report. And even when I called the police, I was on the phone. I got a phone call. I thought he was going to come, but I got a phone call, and there was like this, who am I talking to? You know, kind of thing. And then I'm going, okay, look, it's 2 minutes before I just called the police. They're calling me back. Calm down. You can talk to this person. 2 minutes into it, I get a call waiting from the police. And they go, oh my God, you know, and I'm like flying off the handle again, and I go, okay, hold on, and I listen. It's the same background behind them, and he said, oh, I just got to the call first. So, you know, I've got to keep, with fear, I've got to keep coming back to what actually is in this moment. It's so hard. It's so hard. You know, it's a really, I feel like I've had a week of calisthenics. You know, I haven't had a time in my life where I've had to work that hard on it. But, you know, it doesn't kill you, makes you stronger. But I can even feel the fear right now in my body as we talk about it. You know, I can feel that energy in there that is so easy to get habituated into. And because I had so much of it over a week-long time, I'm really understanding trauma now more than ever, because I've now had this trauma in a conscious way.
Well, I'm curious, how are you experiencing it in your body? I mean, as a felt sensation, where is it, and how would you describe it?
It's right in my chest. It's a fluttering. It's a tightening in my chest. I could feel that just what I call wake up. It's a form of a wake up call. Fear is just one of them. I use all my emotions, and they all have different flavors and feelings inside of me. But fear in particular, this level of fear And of course, according to Course in Miracles, all of those things are fear. What's not joy and love is fear. But this, what I call actual fear, I'm not feeling it as much as I was before. And that to me actually is part of the gift. Just getting curious. It's one of the gifts we can give each other when we stay in empathy, is to focus on it with curiosity. And just as you just asked me about it, it was like, that was actually an opportunity for self-empathy in that moment, to really look at it, really feel it, really be with it, give it permission to be there. Give myself permission to be human and have a feeling, and to get curious and look at it and see, and get curious in a broader way. I'm actually quite safe where I'm sitting here.
So
and maybe someone continues to open up accounts, but I've just spent actually a week of protecting myself with, reports, credit reports, police reports. They can do that, but I'm not feeling super vulnerable about it. I've kind of handed it off to the fraud departments and stuff, and I've kind of built my wall of protection around myself. And then it was the opportunity to also be able to open my heart again and not see everyone, through that lens of fear.
Yeah.
So not such an important part of that. Taking action was a part of that. Being willing to be with myself around that, and continually to stretch my muscle of heart open again.
Mm-hmm. Well, the fear, it's as I looked at those fears, it's somehow to not judge the fear. It's like people say, oh, fear is bad to have. It's like, it's all there, and be able to share it and not judge it and say, and I think that the worst part is not being able to share it. If I'm just kind of all those fears through my life that I haven't shared, been alone with those fears. And so as part of it is, going to the fear, looking at it, and the other is kind of sharing it and knowing, oh, these fears can be kind of shared, and someone else can see them and feel them and kind of empathize with them. And
and I'm not kicked off the island.
Yeah.
Having them. I'm one of us.
Yeah.
And we begin to see our humanity in the eyes of someone else. Someone else's compassion and their empathy actually allows another, if we give that, it gives that other person an opportunity to see themselves with that compassion and empathy.
And not
just human.
Exclude people for the feelings that they have. Someone said, I asked them for the metaphor for empathy, and it was a room where everything is accepted, like all the feelings are accepted.
Nice.
So
the things the feelings, for me, feelings in general are internal communication systems. They're part of our discernment, so they're really important. And the two things that we can do with feelings that are more likely to move us into disconnection are to either reject them, and then we're rejecting our own discernment. We're not actually using discernment. We're actually becoming more disconnected. Or we can wallow in them and identify with them as that's who we are. And then we just sort of splash around in a puddle of the feeling and miss the other pieces that we talked about being really connected and knowing who we really are, and being connected to life, being connected to others, and having clarity between what's the suitcase and what's me. So the alternative is to just be present with it and get curious and to see, what's the meaning of this? What's underneath that's important? And is what's is there something I need to do to address what's important under that feeling, or is it already addressed and I missed it?
Well, that's the curiosity you mentioned initially. It sounded like that part of empathy is having curiosity.
Yeah, the curiosity is the vehicle to presence and engagement. To be really engaged in what's going on as opposed to rejecting it or just wallowing in it.
Well, for me, I'm looking at how do we build a culture of empathy? So it's that world where we have a presence and we kind of share and kind of go maybe towards the fear, go towards the pain. And I look at the intention. I just wonder, how do you kind of get the intention to even start? It's like, how do you get the intention to even have curiosity? You know, kind of like, where does that energy ball kind of start rolling? And I wonder if you had some kind of ideas about that or insights.
I do.
And I'd love to hear them if you could share them.
Thanks for asking. I love that question, actually, because for me, what's important, first of all, is to demystify what empathy is so that people even know what empathy is. For years, people thought empathy was just a mind reading, and, you know, some people were gifted with woo-woo stuff and they could empathically know who you are. So I think we've come a long way from that. And then there's also some sense that it's something hard to do. You really have to work at it. It's some sort of heavy duty, heavy lifting, and sometimes even formulaic thing. And so to let go of some of the baggage around that and really get that, one, it's our nature. And also to get why it's important. Why would it matter? What difference will it make in our lives if we really tune into this part of our nature and really nurture that and really support that, and to be really clear the benefits of it? What's going to make, what difference will it make in my life? If we're not connected to the difference it will make in our lives or how it will really serve, we're unlikely to put a lot of attention on it. And as we as practitioners, and maybe even many of the people who, probably most of the people who will listen to these videos because they have an interest in a culture of empathy, we actually are clear on that, or have a lot of enough clarity about why we would do it. You know, sometimes it's just that it feels good. Sometimes it's that we really see that it makes a difference in being able to have relationships that are satisfying. Sometimes it's that we see the bigger picture, that war is not working. It actually is an avenue to peace, and it's an avenue to well-being. So whatever it is, for us to be really connected to that, when we know why we would do it, and we feel that in our gut, in our heart, in our gut, and we know, then the rest of it unfolds naturally. It just becomes.
Yeah, so it's just really connect to those deeper kind of the feeling that we're getting from the empathy. For me, it's really about that.
Yeah, for me, it's connecting to the feeling. It's connecting to the very clear intentionality of why it would make a difference in myself, in my relationships, in my organizations, in my world, to have empathy.
In like specific to each person's life, are you meaning? Or
yeah, and really, people need to connect to it individually for themselves to be able to have the motivation to do something about it. So that is first and foremost. We can't. I mean, empathy happens inside people. So we need to get really clear that we connect to the empathy in another person, and we can actually facilitate that through, one, our own modeling of empathy, and also through our authentic vulnerability that stimulates empathy in another. That's where the fear can come up, though, and you know, But that actually supports a culture of empathy when people can see another's humanness, so that we can actually have some control over. I look at where the locus of control is in terms of creating something, and the locus of control is inside of each of us.
Yeah, so inside of myself, if I'm wanting to create a culture of empathy, I kind of look at how do I go about doing that. Right now, I'm just doing all this research and interviews and all that kind of stuff. And sometimes I wonder, it's like, wow, what is it really going to take to, transform society so that it has more empathy? And it's like, I'm not really sure. I mean, it's like you can do kind of like, workshops and all that kind of stuff. And, I talk to people like they're in Oregon, they're working in the prisons and, and they're really making a difference there in people's lives. And, it's just, I want something that really works and, that kind of can just kind of happen, so it's.
This lives in you with such yearning and intentionality. I hear that in you. And I want you to know, listening to you brought tears to my eyes because I so appreciate what you're doing. I actually see what you are doing is one of the really important things that needs to happen is that you are keeping it visible. You keep, your voice, your work keeps showing up and keeps affirming empathy and a culture of empathy in the world, so that if we slip away from it, we need each other, we need community, and we need these voices to go, oh yeah, remember empathy?
Right.
And I see you doing this over and over again, and it's one of the things that I was so excited to actually contribute to here. So I feel such gratitude for what you are doing, and it's such an important part. And I'm actually taking a course in social media so I can be tweeting about empathy more and doing more, to really keep it in the fore, in our society, have it really out there. So I really am so grateful, and I invite all of us to consider, what could we do? Everything we do may seem inconsequential, Gandhi said. Do it anyway. What can we do to keep this awareness of empathy so that we don't forget it, we don't go unconscious on it, and that it keeps getting more and more a way of being? Obama's having talked about empathy early on, and then you highlighting that and making sure that was well heard, things like that. Just we need to demystify it. We need to make it an everyday word. We need to be really clear where we want to have it.
Yeah, so that's again kind of that intention that as I've asked people this question of how do we build a culture of empathy, that's something people have said is, well, just create a dialogue, just dialogue about it. And I'm just kind of hearing that reflected in what you're saying is, it's kind of just keeping it in people's consciousness and awareness and saying, wow, what about this? What about that? It's like, even if I don't even really know what I'm really doing, it's just keep bringing it up, and figure, I'll kind of learn as I do it. And I'm going to be, failing and struggling and have my fears and doubts and everything too, but just keep kind of bringing it up and hoping that it's just through that dialogue. It's like just having shared it, having heard that back, that's kind of, I feel it actually kind of strengthening the giving more space to inside myself for that work.
Yeah, thank you so much for tolling the bell. Yeah, and when I was in Thailand and in Turkey, and there's several places where they have the mosques, and twice a day, over the loudspeakers, you hear these things happening, the prayers, and it pervades the
Oh yeah.
entire.
Uh-huh.
You know,
Yeah.
that's my metaphor for what
Mm.
you're doing and what I really believe needs to happen is at least twice a day the word the
Oh
word
yeah. The
empathy
call
and
to
the focus
prayer.
on empathy.
Uh-huh.
Yes, the call to
The
empathy.
call to empathy gets run twice a day, at
That's
least,
right.
just to remind you to, yeah, to pull us maybe away from that fear, right? It's like the fear. It's so easy to kind of have all those fears and other things that kind of maybe. I mean, for myself at least, I should use those I statements. So,
Well, yeah, I think that's very common, and I think that's really true. That's why I went back to that. What isn't love is fear, and empathy for me is part of love. And so it's just we have what's happening out in the world right now in our face. Our boss just yelled at us, whatever it is, and we have this picture of empathy, and we have both, so that this doesn't become the whole truth,
mm-hmm.
but rather we keep knowing that something else is possible and real, and the more we have experience with it, the stronger this picture comes to the fore. It's not forgotten. It's actually happening.
Yeah, keep it in our
It's
awareness.
reality.
Some part of our awareness kind of stays in that. So I even thought we need like a church of empathy. So it's like the church every Sunday, you know, you go and you have it, because I think that's the kind of what churches were about. Is a day where you just kind of thought of you know other
Yeah,
things like that.
I'm not sure once a week is enough.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
Because
it's like at least. I mean, that's
yeah,
like the minimum. Yeah.
bell
Mm.
ringing. When I
The
worked at
daily.
CDC, I lived across the street from a church that would ring the bells every day in the morning. So I would wake up to those bells. It was
Uh-huh.
wonderful. Now I have the chimes that you might hear now and then as you get interviewed with Jim or I, that we have bells, to have some bell of reminder.
Oh yeah.
When I
Good
first,
reminder.
this was way before I actually moved into empathy, but I was a meditator and starting in the early 70s and working on various forms of self-development and liberation. I wanted to be enlightened. I mean, we all wanted to be enlightened in the 70s, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I actually, this was long ago enough that I actually wore a wristwatch. I don't know where not that many people do that anymore, but I had it set to ring every 15 minutes as a bell of mindfulness, that I would stop and I would just meditate for a moment or two, or maybe I had a practice I was doing when I did the Course in Miracles. I would just do the practice of that, and to set up something that wakes us up. I mean, that was every 15 minutes I would do that. Do it at least once or twice a day. At least that, to break through some of the veil of the habits and the culture that it can seem very looming and huge, and shift our reality, our consciousness, to that's the only reality.
Well, this is a lot of fun, Jori. I feel like I could talk for hours with you. We've gone a little bit over an hour so far. Is there something you feel that hasn't been said that you really want to share? We can also have other discussions too in the future. So
I'll be happy to have another discussion. And the only thing that we haven't touched on, and maybe we'll touch on it again, we did touch a little bit about it, of this, what we call compassionate leadership, where we actually work together in a way, collaboratively, where we each take leadership of our own lives, and we make space to contribute to others. We make space for everybody to take leadership in their own lives. How important it is for empathy that we all come alive, and how important it is that if we're going to change culture, that it start with this capacity for everybody to flourish, and flourish from not only the survival that we all have enough to live with, but that we can actually flourish and evolve, and each of us can really own our part in the system. And so that leads me to want to say more. If you're
I'm not
okay
quite
for
clear.
going over.
The collaborative leadership, I was just showing your Facebook page. So this is a community that you have, or
That's actually, we have a training in
Mhm.
that of that name, and for me, the name of it itself is what I was pointing to as what I mean by compassionate leadership. Yes, there's a training, there's that piece, but just this idea that we create systems where we actually help everybody to flourish. And in fact, if we want to create a culture of empathy, one of our biggest leverages is to, and most real power place here, is to work with children and the people who work with children. We can change culture in one generation. It takes 20 years if we focused on creating compassionate leadership within children. And what I mean by compassionate leadership is that we each take responsibility for our own lives, and we find our light inside of us and we shine it out as best we can. We really go with our own integrity and we really shine it out, and we find a way to support everybody else in shining too. The alternative is that we do a power over, and we just, open up your head. I've got the information, do it my way in our education system, and it's really collaborative learning. If we could work with kids to do collaborative learning. When we do trainings, I know when Jim and I train and the partners that we work with train, it's about learning from the inside out rather than the outside in. And then our systems are, when we work with organizations, the systems to create compassionate leadership. And that doesn't just mean a compassionate leader, but that we're all taking leadership and owning different parts, including someone who holds the gestalt part of it. But the power doesn't just come down, but rather the power is shared. And for me, this was also one of these great aha moments for me in this the interdependence, and was the image of a net. If you're familiar with Buddhism, Indra's net is one of the things that sparked that for me. Was this sense like a net, like a fishing net, and at every point of crossing of the threads, there's a light. And that, for me, this is an image I have of our culture and our communities and how we work together, as each of us is a point of light. And so you have that. And then the threads between it are the interactions between us. And the brighter our light, the more influence we have on how far our light, how much we're influencing these interactions. And so this was such a powerful wake-up image for me that has influenced how I see the world, and how for me it's important that I'm fanning your light, because if you don't hold up your part, my light doesn't have an avenue to be there. And I can't hold up the whole net. You can't hold up the whole net. Each of us has our part. And for me, the mission is to do my best to support every point of light, every person in this interdependent net in really shining. And so if we started with the children by really fanning their light, and really helping them to connect to their own inner value and their own mission, their own vision of what they want for themselves and their own mission. And we all help everybody have their own vision and mission. Then supporting how that goes out in the world becomes a way of us all thriving together. How that relates to our training is we spent a fair amount of time on what we call the roadmap to compassionate living. So we're helping people with vision, mission, taking steps towards the world they want to live in, and how they're going to do it and what their part is. It's really clear to me you actually have a leadership plan. You're doing this work, and you've done those steps, and many of us are needing more and more support to be able to find our way, to do our part, to really live the mission that I don't know, that we were either born to do by some philosophies, or that comes to us in the clarity of our lives, of what skills we have and what we can do and where we want to put our focus.
Mm-hmm.
So that was a lot.
No, that was, I mean, there was a couple different pieces in there. The one seemed to be, again, that intention that people, that if we have like that desire to create a culture of empathy and compassion, I mean, kind of like there needs to be that kind of that impetus. And then I was also hearing that you're talking about people getting together who value that. I don't know if that was accurate. Or you?
I think it actually, for me, is supporting people and connecting to their deepest truth, and having them really take their part in what it is that we create as a whole. We are intricately connected, not only as human beings, but also in the vastness of this world and the nature of things. And to really support each other in really flourishing and getting clear on what their mission is, what's their part in holding this all together. And for me, the empathy is supporting us, in each of us being able to flourish and do our part in creating the culture that's important. And maybe the end all is empathy. Maybe that's just a means to something else we don't even know yet.
Yeah.
But whatever it is, the empathy I see as really important. Because if we don't have empathy, we don't really care if anybody else flourishes. So.
Yeah, and you're seeing that net, your metaphor of the net, of everyone being connected together with those lights and kind of having your light shine out and, I guess, support others.
And your light and other people's lights and all of our lights really shining. If your light isn't shining, then there's a part of me that has some level of, I was going to say deficiency. How do I say that? If you're not totally flourishing, a part of me is missing.
Yeah.
Because I am part of something much bigger than just sitting in this chair, in this room. And all
it's kind of that cornucopia. If everyone's a cornucopia, then somebody kind of runs dry, then we're kind of missing out on what they have to offer.
There's a dark hole.
Yeah.
There's a dark, the room's not fully lit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, for building a culture of empathy, I know is that I've heard people talk about, mention about dialogue. Let's just get people talking about it to kind of stimulate, and then that sense of, spending some part of your day, having that part encouraged at least, having the call to prayers, like as they do it in Islam. And then it's also a lot of what I'm seeing here with these dialogues is just getting people networked together, so that there's more kind of interaction between people who are valuing empathy and compassion, so we're not kind of alone. had some dialogues where people would say, I was feeling so alone. This is so, they're in tears, like, I'm not the only one, so.
So I do realize I have an appointment.
Yeah, I could.
We've gone to 12:30.
Yeah, I'm sorry about that going over.
No, don't be sorry.
Okay.
I kept going even as you said it.
Yeah.
I'm really engaged and I love it. And I realize actually it probably is a good time to
Great.
stop. And I'm happy to speak with you again. And
great. Well, thank you so much. This has been so enjoyable. So I'm very grateful for your presence and for all the wonderful work you've been doing. And it's, I feel like I've just had an empathy bath being with you. So.
Yeah, well, it's certainly been that experience for me too. A totally heart-opening, present, engaged experience with you. Thank you.
See the world through other people's eyes. Empathy is a quality of character that can change the world.